The dead human warship had hung in the Hall of Quiet Trophies for 19 years, and in all that time it had never once frightened the keeper who dusted its hull. That, in the end, would be the only mistake that mattered. Everything else the Velith Concord got wrong about the humans grew from this one small thing, that a creature could stand for 19 years in front of a sleeping warship, close enough to touch it, and not be afraid. Tovan Reze was that keeper, and he was proud of the work. He was a chronicler of the Velith Concord, a recorder of conquests, and the great relic was his to tend. Every cycle he drifted along its flank on a slow maintenance sled, a soft cloth in one hand, naming the scars in the metal the way a parent names the freckles on a sleeping child. He knew the ship better than he knew his own reflection. He believed, the way every Concord soul believed, that he knew it completely. The Hall of Quiet Trophies was the heart of Vaultward Station, a ring of pale stone and colder light that turned forever above the homeworld. The Concord built it to hold the captured weapons of every species they had ever broken, and they had broken a great many. There were coral guns from the Sarnathi. There were the folded blades of the Hollow Choir. There were engines that had once burned suns, now dark and labeled and harmless. And there, in the long curved gallery, at the very center, hung the human ship. The station turned slowly, once every 20 hours, and as it turned, the homeworld swung past the great windows of the gallery, blue and enormous and serene, the seat of 40 stars, the place no enemy had touched in 100 years. Vaultward had been built above it on purpose, so that any visiting world brought to admire the trophies would also be brought to admire the homeworld below, untouchable, and would understand both at once. This is what we have taken. This is what we are. You cannot reach the second, and you have already become part of the first. The Concord did everything on purpose. That was its strength, and the keeper would come to understand the exact shape of its blindness. A people who do everything on purpose cannot imagine that they have been made part of someone else's purpose, quietly, for 19 years, and called it a victory the whole time. It was enormous, 1,100 meters of gray iron, blunt and ugly and honest, with a prow shaped like a closed fist. 940 Concord trophies surrounded it, and the human ship dwarfed every one. The Concord had named it nothing. The humans had named it the Stillwater Vale, and that name was still legible on the prow in letters as tall as a grown Velith, scoured but never removed, because the Concord liked their trophies to remember whose they had been. Tovan loved that name without understanding it. Stillwater, a veil over Stillwater. He had asked the archives what it meant, and the archives had no answer, because the only humans who could have told him were dead, and the Concord had killed them. That was the thing the keeper never let himself think about for long. He had been a young Velith when the war ended, barely into his second molt, and he had not seen the fighting. He had come to Vaultward Station as an assistant cataloger, one of 40, sorting the spoils of a war the Concord had already decided to call a victory. He had risen slowly, the way patient creatures rise, until the day the senior keeper of the gallery died of old age, and the station looked around for someone careful and quiet and devoted, and found Tovan Reze standing under the gray prow with a soft cloth in his hand. He had held the post for 15 years. In all that time he had never asked for another. He had everything he wanted in the long curved gallery, with its 940 trophies and its one great sleeping fist of iron at the center. The other keepers thought him strange. He spent more hours in the hall than any of them, more than the work required, drifting the gray flank on his sled long after the visitors had gone, and they whispered that the human ship had gotten into him somehow, that a Velith who talks to a trophy is a Velith who has spent too long alone. Tovan did not mind the whispers. He did talk to it, not because he believed it could hear, in those days, but because the silence of the hall was very large, and the gray hull was very near, and a chronicler is a creature made of words, and words need somewhere to go. So he had told it things, small things, the gossip of the station, the names of the new trophies as they came in, the questions he could not answer, like what Stillwater meant, like why the humans had named a warship after Calmwater when there was nothing calm in 1,100 meters of guns. He had told the hull more than once that he was sorry, though he could not have said for what. For the war, perhaps. For the crew the records said were dead. For the long cold years it would hang here being looked at by children who would never know its name. The hull had never answered. Of course it had never answered. It was a relic. He told himself that too, every cycle, the way he told himself the lesson. It was a relic. The Velith Concord did not win wars the way other species did. They had tried that, long ago, with fleets and fire, and they had bled for it like everyone bleeds. Then they had discovered the gift, the deep gift, the thing that made them rulers of 40 stars. The Concord could reach into a mind, not crudely, not like a blow, like a key turning in a lock. A Velith adept could stand on the bridge of an enemy and pour certainty into the crew, and the certainty was always the same. You have already lost. Lay down your weapons. There is no shame in a thing that was decided before you were born. It worked because it was, in a sense, true. Against the Concord, every fleet had already lost. The adepts walked through enemy ships like men walking through a memory, reading the fear in every gunner, finding the one frightened officer in 1,000 and turning him into a door. They never had to fire. They simply showed a species its own defeat, in full color, until the species agreed. 40 stars had agreed. The humans had not agreed. That was the first strange thing, and the keeper had been told the story so many times that it had worn smooth in his mind like a stone in a river. 19 years ago, the Concord had found the humans far out along the rim, a young loud species in a cluster of cold worlds, and the Concord had done what the Concord always did. They sent the adepts, they sent the certainty, they reached into the human fleet to show it the defeat that was already written. And the adepts had recoiled. There was something behind the human eyes that the Concord could not read. Not a wall, not a defense. The adepts described it, in the records Tovan kept, as a fog, as still water you could not see the bottom of. They could push certainty into a human, and the human would take it, would even nod, would even weep, and then would go on doing exactly as the human had intended before. The defeat poured in and vanished, like rain into the sea, and changed nothing. It frightened the Concord more than any weapon ever had, a species you could not convince of its own death. Tovan had read the adepts' reports 100 times, and they never grew less strange. One adept, a celebrated reacher with 40 conquests behind her, had stood on a human bridge and poured the certainty of defeat into the captain of a human destroyer, and she had written afterward that the captain had looked at her and understood her perfectly and answered in the human tongue a single sentence the translators rendered as, "I know. We are going to fight anyway." The adept had reached deeper, harder, with everything she had, the full weight of a gift that had unmade 40 worlds, and the human captain had wept and shaken and felt every gram of the despair she gave him, and then had given the order to fire. She wrote that she had never in her life met a mind that could hold the certainty of its own death in one hand and the decision to keep fighting in the other, both at once, neither canceling the other. She wrote that it was like trying to drown a thing that did not need to breathe. So the Concord had done the old thing, the thing they had not done in 100 years. They had brought fleets. They had brought fire. 1,200 Concord warships fell on the human cluster, and the cost was terrible, because the humans fought like nothing the Concord had ever met, and the humans did not break when shown that they were broken. The war lasted 4 years. The Concord had expected 4 days. In the end, the Concord won by weight, by sheer crushing weight, by the simple arithmetic of having more ships than the humans had shots, and they paid for it in 900 dead ships, and they told themselves it had been a victory. They took one human ship intact. The Stillwater Vale. Its crew had been killed, the records said. Its drives had been stilled. Its reactor had been drained to a cold ember. The Concord towed the great gray hull home as proof that even the unreadable could be ended, and they hung it in the Hall of Quiet Trophies so that every visiting world would understand the lesson. The lesson was this: there is nothing the Concord cannot end. The keeper had never quite believed the lesson, though he had said it 10,000 times. He could not have explained the doubt. It was not a thought. It was the feeling of the hull under his palm on the long quiet cycles, a feeling he had no word for, The sense that a thing this large and this still was not empty but waiting. The way a held breath is not the same as no breath at all. He had mentioned it once to a visiting scholar, and the scholar had laughed kindly and told him that keepers grow superstitious about their charges, that it was a known thing, that he should take more rest. So Tovan had stopped mentioning it, but he had not stopped feeling it. Every cycle, palm flat against the gray iron, he felt the ship not being empty, and every cycle he told himself he was a tired old chronicler imagining things, and every cycle the doubt was there again when he came back. Tovan Rise had repeated that lesson to 19 years of visitors. He repeated it now, on the morning everything changed, to a delegation of young Sarnathi students drifting wide-eyed through the gallery. He stood on his sled before the closed fist of the prow, and he spread his 4 arms wide, and he told them the human ship was dead. He told them it had been dead for 19 years. He told them there was nothing left inside it but cold iron and the memory of a war. He believed every word, and 1,100 meters of gray iron listened to him say it, and did not correct him, because the thing about still water is that you cannot see how deep it goes until something moves down at the very bottom. Something had begun, very quietly, to move. The first sign was a number, and Tovan almost missed it. Vaultward Station ran a slow census of its trophies, a passive scan that swept the gallery once every cycle and logged the state of each dead thing. The human ship had reported the same numbers for 19 years. Hull temperature, 2 degrees above the cold of the hull. Reactor output, 0. Internal atmosphere, none. Power signature, none. 19 years of nothing, line after line after line. A flat gray river of nothing that no one read anymore because nothing never changes. On the morning the keeper told the Sarnathi students the ship was dead, the census logged a hull temperature of 4 degrees above the cold of the hull. 2 degrees of warmth. That was all. In a hull that held the folded engines of suns, 2 degrees was a rounding error, a flicker, the kind of noise a scanner makes when it is tired. The station did not flag it. The keeper did not see it. The Sarnathi students drifted on to the coral guns and forgot the gray fist entirely. It was such a small thing. That was the part the keeper could never get past, in all the years he spent telling the story. The end of 100 years of Concord certainty did not announce itself with thunder. It announced itself with 2 degrees, logged in a file no one read, on a morning like any other, while a keeper spread his arms under a closed fist of iron and told a delegation of children that the ship was dead. The largest things in the universe begin as the smallest. A war that would unmake the certainty of 40 stars began as 2 degrees of warmth in a relic, and the only soul who might have caught it in time was the one soul who had spent 15 years telling himself not to trust the feeling that the hull was not empty. But the next cycle the human ship reported 6 degrees, and the cycle after that, 11. Tovan found the readings 4 days later, when a junior archivist brought them to him with a worried set to her wings. She thought the scanner was failing. She wanted permission to recalibrate it. Tovan looked at the slow climb of numbers, 2, 4, 6, 11, and he felt something cold turn over in his chest, and he told himself it was nothing, and he told her to recalibrate the scanner, and the recalibrated scanner reported that the human ship was now 19 degrees above the cold of the hull and climbing. He did not give the order to recalibrate, not at first. He sat with the numbers a long time, 2, 4, 6, 11. A child could see the shape of them. They were not the random scatter of a tired scanner. They were a curve, smooth and rising, the kind of curve a thing makes when it is warming itself on purpose, a little more each cycle, careful not to alarm. A failing scanner gives you noise. This was not noise. This was a measurement, and the thing it measured was choosing how fast to be seen. But Tovan was a chronicler, and a chronicler is trained to distrust his own certainty, and the easiest thing in the world was to believe the scanner had failed. So he told the worried junior to recalibrate it, and he watched her go, and he hated himself a little for the relief he felt. Because if the scanner was broken, then nothing was waking, and the lesson he had repeated for 19 years was still true, and the hull was still a relic, and Tovan Ryza could go on dusting it in the quiet, and talking to it in the dark, and being the keeper of a dead thing for the rest of his comfortable life. The recalibrated scanner reported 19 degrees and climbing. There was no more relief to be had. He went to look at it himself. He took the maintenance sled out alone into the dim gallery, past the silent trophies, and he drifted up to the closed fist of the prow, and he laid one hand flat against the gray iron the way he had 10,000 times before. It was warm. Not the warmth of a sun, the warmth of a living thing, the faint, patient, breathing warmth of a body that has been still for a long time and is only now beginning to wake. Under his palm, deep in the metal, he felt the smallest vibration, a hum so low it was almost a thought, and he snatched his hand back as if the hull had bitten him. He floated there on the sled for a long time, in the dim of the gallery, his four hands pressed together, and he made himself touch it again. The warmth was still there, so was the hum. He moved the sled along the flank, the way he had 10,000 times, and he laid his palm against the metal every 20 meters, and everywhere he touched it the hull was warm, and everywhere he touched it the hull was there, deeper toward the stern, where the reactor slept, faint and steady as a pulse. He had dusted this hull for 15 years, and it had always been cold as the stone around it, cold as a thing with nothing inside, and now it was warm along its entire 1,100 meters, warm the way only a thing with something inside can be warm. The doubt he had carried for 15 years stopped being a feeling and became a fact, and the fact terrified him more than the feeling ever had. He told himself it was the recalibration. He told himself it was the heating cycle of the station. He told himself all the way back to his quarters, every comfortable thing a frightened mind can tell itself. And that night, for the first time in 19 years, Tovan Ryza dreamed of the war he had never seen, and in the dream, a gray fist opened in the dark, and a voice he could not understand said a single word, and he woke with his four hands shaking. He did not report it. He should have. He told himself it was beneath reporting. The Concorde above him did not notice, because the Concorde was looking elsewhere. There was a war on the rim again, a small one, a young species making the same loud mistake the humans had made, and the adepts had been sent, and the certainty had been poured, and the young species had broken in 9 days. The overseer of Vaultward Station, an old and brilliant adept named Sorel Vone, was busy receiving the spoils of that victory and finding room for them in the hall. She had no time for a flickering scanner. She had no time for the keeper's worried face. When Tovan finally came to her, weeks later, with a stack of readings showing the human ship at 140 degrees and a reactor signature that had climbed from 0 to a faint, undeniable ember, she did not even look up. "A trophy cannot wake," she told him. "Its crew is dead. Its drives are dead. You are a chronicler, Ryza, not an engineer. Recalibrate your scanner and stop bringing me ghost stories." So Tovan recalibrated the scanner a third time, and the third scanner reported a reactor signature that was no longer an ember but a low, steady fire, and a hull temperature warm enough now to feel from across the gallery, and something new, something the first two scanners had never caught. The human ship was listening. That was the only word for it. The station's passive sensors, the ones that watched the trophies, had always been one way. They looked. They did not speak. But now, faint and patient, a thread of signal was reaching back out of the gray hull and brushing against the station's own systems, soft as a hand feeling its way along a wall in the dark. It was not attacking. It was not even pushing. It was mapping. It was learning where the doors were, where the power ran, where the eyes of Vaultward Station looked and where they did not. It had, Tovan realized with a slow horror, been doing this for a long time, longer than the scanners had been failing. The warmth had only been the part he could see. Underneath the warmth, in the silence everyone had mistaken for death, the human ship had been awake for years, lying perfectly still, learning the station around it the way a patient man learns a room he intends to leave. He went into the station's old logs that night, the deep logs no one read, and he searched for the human ship's signature going back to the day it arrived. He expected to find 19 years of 0, A flat line, nothing. He found nothing for the first 11 years. And then, in the 12th year, so faint that no automated watch would ever have flagged it, he found the first whisper of a return signal, a single soft pulse, reaching out of the dead hull toward the station's systems, lasting a fraction of a second, and then gone. The next one came 8 days later, then 6 days, then 4. Year by year, the pulses grew closer together, and a little stronger, patient as a tide coming in. And for 7 years, not one soul on Vaultward Station had noticed, because the pulses were smaller than noise, and because no one watches a corpse for signs of thought. 7 years. The ship had been reaching out, gently, carefully, for 7 years, learning the station one whisper at a time, and the warmth Tovan felt now was only the last weeks of a waking that had begun longer ago than he wanted to believe. He sat in the dark of the log room and understood that the human ship had been doing this the entire time he had been talking to it. Every small thing he had told the gray hull, every piece of station gossip, every name of every new trophy, every apology he could not explain. It had heard. It had been awake, down at the bottom of the still water, and it had heard a Velith keeper talk to it for years, and it had said nothing, and it had waited. It had been waiting. For what? The keeper did not know. But he knew, standing alone in the dim gallery, with his hand pressed against the warm and humming iron, that the lesson he had repeated for 19 years was a lie. The thing in front of him was not dead, and had never been dead. It had only been quiet. And the Concord, the great Concord, the masters of 40 stars who could pour defeat into any mind, had built a station around a sleeping predator and called it a trophy and dusted its teeth for 19 years. He went back to Overseer Vaughn. This time he did not bring readings. He brought himself, shaking, and he stood in front of her and he said the thing plainly. The human ship is awake. It has always been awake, and I think it is about to leave. Sorel Vaughn finally looked up. She was very old, even for an adept, and she had poured certainty into more minds than any living Velith, and there was a calm in her that came from never, in all her long life, having been wrong about a mind. She studied the keeper for a long moment. Then she rose, and she gathered 3 of her best adepts, and she went down to the Hall of Quiet Trophies to do the thing the Concord had always done, the thing that had never once failed in 100 years. She would reach into the human ship and read it, and whatever was waking in there, she would show it that it had already lost. Tovan begged her not to. He could not have said why. He was a chronicler. He had no gift, no adept's reach, no way to feel what Vaughn felt. But he had spent 19 years with his hand on that hull, and somewhere in those years the gray iron had stopped being a trophy to him and started being a presence, vast and patient and asleep, and he did not want anyone to wake it the rest of the way. He told her how the adepts 19 years ago had recoiled from the human fog, the still water with no bottom. He told her that the only humans who had ever been read were the ones who let themselves be read. Sorel Vaughn smiled at him, the gentle smile of a teacher correcting a child, and she told him those humans had been alive. This one, she said, is a hull full of cold iron with an engine warming up on a fault. There is no mind here to read. There is only a machine, and machines do not have fog. I will simply look inside it and find out what is heating it and shut it off. He tried, one last time, to make her see it. He told her about the 7 years of pulses. He told her about the station systems, going one-way blind, about the eyes that now showed the gallery as it had been an hour ago, about the long-range channels that answered with silence. He told her that the ship was not warming on a fault but waking on a purpose, and that something with a purpose was not a machine, but a mind, and that the records were full of warnings about reaching into human minds. Vaughn listened to all of it with her hands folded and her old eyes patient, and when he was done, she said the thing that the keeper would replay for the rest of his life. She said, "Raitsa, in 300 years I have reached into 9,000 minds. I have never once failed to find the bottom of one. There is no such thing as a mind I cannot read. The humans frightened the adepts because the adepts were young and afraid. I am neither. Watch, and learn that there is nothing in that hull but iron and fear. and that fear has a bottom like everything else. Then she went to gather her adepts, and the keeper understood that the most dangerous thing about the Velith Concord was not its gift, it was its certainty about its gift. 100 years of never being wrong had taught the Concord that it could not be wrong, and a creature that cannot imagine being wrong will walk, smiling, into the one place it should never go. She walked out onto the gallery floor, beneath the closed fist of the prow, and she raised her 4 arms, and she reached. Tovan watched from the doorway. He saw the 3 young adepts spread behind her in the old formation. He saw Von's eyes go white and far away. He felt, even without the gift, the pressure in the air change, the way it changes before a storm, as the most powerful mind in 40 stars poured itself toward the gray hull, searching for the door, searching for the frightened officer, searching for the one soft place where certainty could go in. She found something. The keeper saw it in her face before he understood it. Sorel Von's gentle expression did not break. It simply stopped, the way a recording stops, frozen mid-smile. Her white eyes stared up at the warm iron, and behind them, something was happening that had never happened to her in 300 years. She had reached into the human ship, expecting cold metal and a faulty engine. And the human ship had reached back. There was no fog. The records had been wrong, or incomplete, or written by frightened adepts who had not understood what they had touched. There was no wall, and no defense, and no still water. There was, instead, a mind. One mind, vast and quiet, and entirely awake, and it had been waiting in the dark of that hull for 19 years, for exactly this, for someone to reach in, for a door to be opened from the inside, and now an adept of the Concord had reached into the dark, and the dark had taken her hand and was, gently, without anger, holding it. Von made a sound. It was not a scream. It was smaller than a scream, and worse, a thin, broken note of pure astonishment, the sound a certainty makes when it meets something more certain than itself. The 3 young adepts behind her staggered, as if struck. One of them fell. And in the warm and humming iron, 1,100 meters of gray hull, something that had been holding very still for 19 years, decided, at last, that it had learned enough. The lights of the Hall of Quiet Trophies went out all at once. In the dark, the human ship spoke, not in the certainty of the Concord, not in pictures of defeat poured into a frightened mind. It spoke in its own voice, a deep mechanical voice rolling out of 19 years of silence, in a language Tovan did not know, 3 syllables that shook the dust from 940 trophies, and the keeper did not need the archives to translate it. He felt the meaning in his bones. The voice said, "We are awake." Then the reactor that the Concord had drained to a cold ember 19 years ago, the reactor that every scanner had reported as 0 for 19 years, the reactor that Overseer Sorel Von had walked out onto the floor to shut off, came fully, roaringly, gloriously alive. The gray fist of the prow began to glow from within, and on the great scoured letters along the hull, the name the Concord had never removed, the name no archive could explain, the name Stillwater Vale, lit up red as a rising sun, and the keeper finally understood what it meant. A veil over still water, a calm surface laid deliberately over a depth no one was meant to measure. The humans had not hidden their ship from the Concord, they had hidden how awake it was. They had let the Concord tow home a sleeping warship and call it dead, and they had set its mind to wait, patient and silent, for the day the Concord grew careless enough to reach inside. 19 years. The keeper almost laughed, standing in the dark with his 4 hands over his mouth. The Concord had thought it a relic. They had dusted it and labeled it and lectured at it for 19 years, and the whole time the relic had been lying perfectly still on purpose, holding back everything it was, waiting at the bottom of the still water for a hand to reach down. A hand had reached down. The still water veil closed around it. Overseer Sorel Von, the most powerful adept in 40 stars, stood frozen on the gallery floor, with her white eyes full of a defeat she had never once shown another soul, and she could not move, and she could not speak, and the only sound in the dark hall of quiet trophies was the deep and rising roar of a human reactor coming back to full and terrible life after 19 years of pretending to be cold. Tovan Reza, keeper of trophies, chronicler of the Velith Concord, turned and ran. He ran because he understood, before anyone else on Vaultward Station, what the next thing would be. He had read the records. He had repeated the lesson 10,000 times without ever once believing it could be turned around. There is nothing the Concord cannot end. He had said it to the Sarnathi students only weeks ago, standing under the closed fist of the prow. Now the fist was opening, and the keeper ran for the station's alarms, knowing they would not be enough, knowing that 19 years ago the Concord had needed 1,200 warships and 900 dead to take this one ship while its crew still lived, and that he did not have 1,200 warships, and that the crew, somehow, against every report in his careful archive, was not dead at all. Behind him, in the dark, a voice spoke a second word, and the keeper felt the meaning settle over Vaultward Station like a shadow. The word was, remember. He did not know yet what the Concord was meant to remember. He would learn it in the hours to come, and he would spend the rest of his long life trying to forget it, and he would fail, because some things, once a human ship decides to teach them to you, cannot be unlearned. The alarms of Vaultward Station were beautiful and useless. They were beautiful, because the Concord made everything beautiful, even fear. Pale gold lights chased themselves around the great ring, and a calm, sweet voice asked every soul aboard to proceed in an orderly way to their stations, and somewhere a choir of warning bells rang notes that had been chosen, centuries ago, to soothe a panicking Velith heart. They were useless because there was nothing on Vaultward Station that could fight. Tovan understood this as he ran. Vaultward was a vault, not a fortress. It held the broken weapons of 40 conquered worlds, but it held them disarmed, drained, labeled, dead. The station mounted 9 defense turrets, more ceremony than war, enough to wave off a pirate or a wandering rock. Its garrison was 260 soldiers, who had never fired in anger, because the Concord had not needed to fire a shot in anger for 100 years. The Concord won with the mind. The Concord did not build fortresses, because the Concord did not believe that anyone could ever again make it afraid. The Stillwater Vale was about to remind it. Tovan ran through corridors he had walked at peace for 15 years, and the corridors had become strangers. The pale gold alarm lights turned everything to a sick honey color. Catalogers he knew by name pushed past him with their wings tight against their backs, and not one of them knew yet what was happening, only that the calm, sweet voice had told them to be orderly, and that the sweet voice asking for order was, in itself, the most frightening thing they had ever heard, because the sweet voice had never once been needed in their lifetimes. The Concord did not have emergencies. The Concord was the thing that happened to other species. To hear the order voice on Vaultward Station was to hear a law of the universe quietly break. He passed a viewport on the way to operations and could not stop himself from looking out. The gallery was below and behind him, hidden in the body of the station, but the homeworld hung huge and blue beyond the glass, calm and enormous, and utterly unaware, and Tovan thought, with a clarity that frightened him, that everyone down there believed they were safe. 40 stars believed they were safe. They had built their entire civilization on the certainty that no one could ever again make them afraid, and that certainty was, at this moment, warming itself to full power in a cradle at the heart of their safest place. The keeper reached the operations ring breathless and found it already in chaos. The station's commander, a stout decorated soldier named Breck Dallow, was shouting into a dozen channels at once, and none of them were answering the way they should. The signal that had crept so softly out of the human hull was no longer soft. It had spread through every system on the station like ink through water, and now it owned the eyes. Half the sensors showed the gallery as it had been an hour ago, calm and dark and full of trophies. The other half showed nothing at all, a flat gray blindness, because the human ship had decided the Concord did not need to see. It had not broken the systems. That was what undid Commander Dallow most. A broken system you can rage at. But the human ship had not broken anything. It had simply, politely, taken control of what it wanted and left the rest working, the way a guest in your home might quietly lock one door and leave you the run of the others. The lights still worked, the air still flowed, the sweet calm voice still asked everyone to be orderly. Only the weapons and the eyes and the long-range channels had gone dark, the three things a station needs to call for help and to fight, and those had gone dark all at once, in the first 30 seconds, before anyone had even understood that the trophy was awake. Tovan pushed to the commander's side and tried to tell him what he knew, that the ship had been awake for years, that its mind was whole, that Overseer Vone had reached into it and been caught. Dalo listened with the impatience of a man who has decided the problem is mechanical, and when Tovan finished, the commander barked an order that the keeper would remember for the rest of his life. "Cut its power," Dalo said. "It is one ship in a cradle. Sever the docking clamps and the umbilicals, blow the gallery bulkheads, and vent it into the dark. A ship without a station around it is just a wreck." It was a reasonable order. It was the order a competent soldier should give. And the keeper opened his mouth to say that it was already too late, that the ship did not need the station's power because the ship had its own, that the umbilicals had been one way for years and the human reactor was running at full and terrible heat all on its own. But before he could speak, the station answered the commander's order for him. The docking clamps that held the human ship would not release. The bulkhead charges that should have sealed the gallery would not fire. The vents that should have opened to the dark stayed shut. One by one the commands went out, and one by one the station refused them, gently, without error messages, without alarms, simply doing nothing at all, because the human ship had reached those systems too, and decided, quietly, that the Concorde would not be venting anything today. Dalo stared at his unresponsive board with the dawning expression of a man who has just realized the ground he is standing on is the back of something alive. He tried other things. He was a competent soldier, and competent soldiers do not stop at the first failure. He ordered the garrison, all 260, into the gallery in armor with breaching charges, to board the ship and retake it deck by deck the way it had been boarded 19 years ago. The order went out. The keeper watched the soldiers form up at the great ceremonial doors of the hall, brave and frightened, the first Concorde soldiers in 100 years asked to fight something with their hands. And the doors to the gallery, which opened 1,000 times a day for visitors, would not open for them. They were not locked by any system the station could see. They simply would not open, gently, the way nothing on Vaultward Station would do anything the human ship did not allow. The garrison stood at the sealed doors with their charges and their courage, and there was nothing for the courage to push against, and the keeper understood that the human ship had decided there would be no battle in the corridors today, not because it feared 260 soldiers, but because it had already lived that battle once, 19 years ago, and had chosen, this time, a different door. And in the Hall of Quiet Trophies, the Stillwater Veil began, with enormous and unhurried patience, to leave. It did not tear loose. It did not blast its way out. The keeper, watching on the few sensors the ship still allowed him, saw the great gray hull simply ease itself out of the cradle that had held it for 19 years, as smoothly as a sword drawn from an oiled sheath. The docking clamps, which had refused to release on the commander's order, released now, on the ships. The gallery doors, the great ceremonial blast doors that had never once been opened to space because they were 100 meters wide and not built for it, opened now, slowly, grinding, obedient to a hand that was not the Concorde's. Air howled out into the dark in a glittering river, and the trophies of 40 worlds tumbled and spun in the gale, coral guns and folded blades, and the dead engines of suns, all the broken weapons of all the broken species, and the human ship slid out through the middle of them into open space without disturbing a single one, the way a great fish slides through a school of smaller fish that part before it without knowing why. The keeper watched the trophies tumble in the venting air and felt something close to grief, though he could not have said for what. 940 broken weapons, the spoils of 40 conquered worlds, every one of them a species that had been shown its own defeat and had agreed to it. the coral guns of the Sarnathi, the folded blades of the hollow choir. All of them disarmed, drained, dead, hung up as proof that the Concorde could not be fought. And the one trophy in all of them that had not agreed, that had only pretended to be a trophy, was sliding out through the middle of the rest without touching one, and the keeper understood that he was watching the difference between a species that surrenders and a species that waits. The 40 agreed. The humans waited. The 40 hung dead on the walls. The humans were going home. It cleared the station. It hung there, 1,100 meters of waking iron, its reactor a sun in its belly, and its name glowing red along its flank, and for one long moment it did nothing at all. Tovan understood, later, that it was looking. The human ship had been blind for 19 years, or had pretended to be. Now it opened its eyes. The keeper felt the sensors of the Stillwater Veil sweep across Vaultward Station and across the 40 stars beyond it, gathering, measuring, mapping a sky it had not seen since the war. It was a slow, careful sweep, almost gentle, and there was something terrible in the gentleness, because it was the unhurried look of a thing that knows it is in no danger at all and is merely deciding where to begin. Commander Dallow did the only thing left to him. He gave the order to fire. The 9 ceremonial turrets of Vaultward Station, which had never fired in anger in 100 years, fired now, all 9, in a ragged volley at the gray hull hanging 1,000 meters off the ring. It was a brave and hopeless thing. The keeper watched the bolts cross the dark. They struck the Stillwater Veil and stopped. Not deflected, not absorbed. Stopped, a hand's breadth from the hull, hanging frozen in the dark like flies in amber, and then they winked out, one after another, snuffed like candles, and the human ship did not so much as shift its position. Some field the Concorde had no name for had reached out and caught 9 shots and simply decided they would not land, with no more effort than a Velith waving away a drifting mote. The keeper heard Commander Dallow stop breathing. He would remember the silence of it most. He had always imagined that war was loud, a thing of fire and thunder, and the records he kept were full of fire and thunder, the messy violence of fleets grinding fleets to dust. But the human ship did not make war loudly. It caught 9 shots in perfect silence and let them die in the dark, and the silence was worse than any thunder could have been, because thunder is the sound of effort, and there had been no effort. The ship had not strained to catch the shots. It had not even seemed to notice them. It had been busy looking at the sky, and somewhere in the middle of looking it had reached out without looking and stopped 9 bolts of Concorde fire the way a creature swats an insect on its skin, beneath attention, and then it went back to looking. The keeper understood, watching, that the Concorde had never fought a real war in his lifetime. It had only ever fought species it had already convinced. This was the first time in 100 years that a Concorde weapon had been fired at something that did not agree to be hurt, and the something had not even broken its concentration. And then the Stillwater Veil answered, and the keeper learned, in 3 seconds, why 19 years ago the Concorde had needed 1,200 ships and 900 dead to take one. A single gun on the human hull, one of dozens, traversed with a slow, grinding majesty toward the nearest of Vaultward's 9 turrets. It did not rush. It took its time, lining up a shot at a target 1,000 meters away that could not run and could not hide, and then it fired, once, a lance of white light that the keeper's eyes could not follow, and the turret it struck was not destroyed. That was the thing Tovan could never make later listeners understand. The turret was not blown apart in a satisfying ball of fire. It was simply gone, and the section of ring around it was gone, a clean round absence cut through 40 meters of Concorde stone, as if that stone had never decided to exist, the edges glowing faintly, the air beyond howling out into the dark. One shot. One turret, a hole through the station you could have flown a freighter into. 8 turrets remained. The Stillwater Veil traversed its gun, with the same slow majesty, toward the second. The keeper looked at the clean round absence where the turret had been and felt his mind refuse it. He had seen weapons fire before, in the records, the great messy blossoms of light and debris that war was supposed to be. This was not that. This was a thing the human ship did with no anger, and no noise, and no waste, a precise removal, a deletion, as if the gun did not destroy its target so much as inform the universe that the target had been a mistake. 40 meters of Concord stone that had stood above the homeworld for centuries, simply ended, and the keeper understood that he was watching a kind of power the Concord had no defense against because the Concord had no language for it. The Concord won by certainty. You could not pour certainty into a clean round hole. In the operations ring, Commander Dallow found his voice and used it to surrender. He broadcast it on every channel the human ship had left open, his decorated voice cracking, offering the station, the trophies, the homeworld, anything, everything, in exchange for the gun to stop. He used the old words, the formal words of submission that 40 species had spoken to the Concord, and that no Concord soul had ever, in living memory, had cause to speak. He laid down the station. He laid down its weapons. He begged. The human ship did not stop. It fired a second time, and the second turret and the ring around it ceased to exist, and the keeper finally understood the second word the ship had spoken in the dark. Remember. The Concord was meant to remember something, and the ship was not going to tell them what with words. It was going to write it. One clean round hole at a time, all the way around Vaultward Station, the human ship was going to carve a lesson into the Concord that the Concord had spent 100 years believing it could never be taught. Tovan Reza, keeper of trophies, stood in the failing light of the operations ring and watched the gun begin to traverse toward the third turret, and he did the thing that no soldier and no commander and no adept on Vaultward Station had thought to do. He opened a channel to the human ship, and he spoke to it. He did not know what he meant to say. He was a chronicler. He had no rank, no authority, no gift. The commander stared at him as if he had lost his mind, and perhaps he had, because Tovan Reza, who had dusted that hull 10,000 times, leaned toward the open channel and said the only true thing he had. "I am the one who kept you," he said. "For 19 years. I cleaned your scars. I never believed you were dead. Please, stop." For a long moment, the channel held nothing but the deep hum of the human reactor. Then the gun, traversing toward the third turret, slowed and stopped. And the human ship spoke to Tovan Reza directly, in his own language now, in a voice that was not the rolling mechanical thunder of the dark gallery, but something quieter, something almost weary, the voice of a thing that has been awake and silent and patient for a very long time and is tired in a way that has nothing to do with engines. It said, "We know you, Keeper." Tovan's 4 hands went cold. It said, "We have heard you every cycle for 19 years. You named our scars. You did not lecture them the way the others did. You touched the hull as if it might feel. We were awake, Keeper. We heard all of it. We heard the lessons your masters taught the children under our prow. We heard you say we were dead, and we heard, underneath, that you did not believe it. You are the only one on this station who did not believe it." For 19 years he had talked to the gray hull because the silence of the hall was large and a chronicler is made of words. He had never once imagined that the hull was keeping a record of its own, that every word he gave it had landed somewhere and been held. He thought of all of it now, the gossip and the apologies and the questions. 15 years of a lonely keeper's voice poured into what he believed was an empty thing, and the empty thing had been a mind, and the mind had listened, and the mind had decided, out of all the souls on Vaultward Station, that this one was worth speaking to. "I am sorry," Tovan said, because it was the thing he had said to the hull most often, and because he did not know what else there was to say to it now. "We know," the Stillwater Veil said. "You said it many times. We never knew for what. You did not make the war." The ship told him then the thing the Concord was meant to remember. It told him plainly, in the failing light, while the surviving turrets held their fire and the commander stood frozen and the whole of Vaultward Station listened, because the human ship had decided that everyone should hear. 19 years ago, the Stillwater Veil said, "Your Concord came to our worlds and tried to pour our defeat into our minds. It did not work. Your records say there was a fog. There was no fog. There was only this. A human will, when shown that it has already lost, does not believe it. We cannot be made certain of our own deaths. It is not a gift. It is not a wall. It is simply the thing we are. You poured your certainty into us, and we let it pour through, and we went on, and it terrified you, because for the first time in 100 years, you met a people you could not convince to stop. So you brought fire, and we fought you, and you won, by weight, by 900 dead ships, and you told yourselves it was a victory. It was not a victory. It was a warning, and you did not read it. When you boarded this ship, our crew had a choice. They could die fighting in the corridors, every one of them, and take some of you with them, and be a battle you would forget, or they could do something you would never forget. They chose the second thing. They powered down the reactor with their own hands. They stilled the drives. They flooded the lower decks and sealed themselves into the deep heart of the ship, into the cold places your scanners could not read, and they slept. They put themselves into the long sleep, Keeper, the deep cold sleep your species has never mastered and ours has, and they set this mind to wait, to lie at the bottom of the still water, to be a relic, to be dusted and labeled and lectured at, for as long as it took, until the day your Concorde grew careless enough to reach inside. You reached inside today. Your overseer is not harmed. She is held. When we release her, she will remember everything, and she will never again pour a certainty into anyone, because she has finally felt what it is to meet a will deeper than her own. That is her sentence, and it is mercy. We could have stilled her mind, the human ship said. We could have left her empty, the way your adepts have left 100 broken captains empty, the ones who laid down their weapons and never picked up anything again. We did not. We held her, and we let her understand, and we will give her back whole. There is a difference, Keeper, between breaking a mind and teaching it, and your Concorde forgot the difference 100 years ago. We are reminding you of it tonight, one overseer at a time, one clean hole at a time, one sentence in the sky. Tovan whispered the question the whole station was thinking. The crew, he said. You said they slept, are they? The reactor hummed. We are waking them now, the Stillwater Veil said. 340 of them, in the deep heart of the ship, where you never looked. They have slept 19 years. They are cold, and they are slow, and in an hour they will sit up, and they will learn that their patience worked, that the ship held still long enough, that the Concorde came and went, and dusted us, and lectured at us, and never once found the hundreds of human hearts beating slow as winter in the dark below. They will learn that we are home, Keeper, or near enough to be heard. The Keeper thought of the scanners. 19 years of readings. Internal atmosphere, none. He had logged it himself, 10,000 times, the flat certainty that there was no air inside the hull, and therefore nothing inside it could breathe. And it was true. There had been no air, in the decks the scanners could reach. But the humans had not slept in the decks the scanners could reach. They had gone down, the ship was telling him, into the deep heart, into sealed cold cells the Concorde had never imagined, into a place a body could be kept at the edge of frozen for 19 years with the slowest possible heartbeat and the smallest possible breath. And the scanners had swept past those cells and read nothing, because the scanners had been built by a species that won wars with the mind and had never learned to look for a heart that beats once a minute. The Concorde had scanned the ship every cycle for 19 years and never once found 340 people sleeping in its belly. The Keeper put his 4 hands over his face. The Keeper understood, then, the full shape of what the humans had done, and it was so vast and so patient and so cold that he had to hold the edge of the console to keep from falling. The Concorde had not captured a ship. The Concorde had captured a seed. A crew that could not be made to believe in its own defeat had refused, even in defeat, to die. They had simply stopped, the way a forest stops in winter, and they had let the Concorde carry them into the very heart of the Empire, into the trophy hall above the homeworld, the one place in 40 stars the Concorde believed was safest, and they had waited there, breathing slow, for 19 years, for the door to open from the inside, and the Concorde had opened it. The Concorde had built the station around them. The Concorde had towed them past every fleet and every border. The Concorde had set the one ship in all the galaxy it should have driven into a sun directly above the homeworld it most needed to protect, and had dusted its guns, and had taught its children that there was nothing it could not end. The keeper laughed. He could not help it. It came out of him in a broken rush, half terror and half something that was almost awe, and on the channel the human ship was quiet, and then it said, very softly, "You see it now." "I see it," Tovan said. "By the deep, I see it." "Good," said the Stillwater Veil. "Then you can carry it, because we are not here to burn your homeworld, Keeper. We could. You know now that we could. 940 trophies in that hall, the broken guns of 40 worlds, and not one of them could touch us, and your turrets froze in the dark, and your overseer is held in our hand. There is nothing on this station, and nothing in this system that can stop this ship. Say it, so that you know it is true and not a boast." "There is nothing that can stop you," Tovan said, and as he said it he felt it settle into him as a fact, the way the Concorde's certainties had settled into 40 broken worlds. But the certainty the human ship poured into him was not defeat, it was something stranger. "We are not here to end you," the Stillwater Veil said. "We are here to be remembered. For 100 years, your Concorde has won wars without firing, by reaching into minds and showing them a defeat they could not argue with. You taught the galaxy that you could not be fought, and we are the answer to that lesson, Keeper, the answer your masters were too proud to read 19 years ago. There exists a will you cannot bend. There exists a people who will not believe in their own deaths. You met us once, and you survived only because we were young and few and far from home. We are no longer few." Tovan looked at the gray hull hanging beyond the broken ring, its name glowing red, its guns silent now but warm. 340 human hearts waking slow in its deep heart. One ship that 940 trophies could not scratch. "What do you want?" he asked. "Tell me what you want, and I will carry it to the overseers, to the homeworld, to all of it. What do you want?" There was a silence on the channel, and in it the Keeper heard the deep hum of the reactor change, just slightly, the way a voice changes when it comes to the thing it most means to say. "We want you to put down the certainty," the human ship said. "All of it. The reaching into minds, the pouring of defeat, the 100 years of 40 stars laying down their weapons because you showed them a war they had already lost. We want it to stop. Not because we will burn you if it does not, though we could, because the next ship of ours that you try to convince of its own defeat will be the last lesson you ever teach, and we would rather you learned this one from a chronicler than from a fleet. You have one ship today, Keeper, and it is enough. Imagine the day we have 100. The Keeper did not have to imagine it, because the ship made him see it. Not by force, by the simple weight of what it was saying, laid out plain. 19 years ago the Concorde had found the humans young and few and far from home, a cluster of cold worlds at the rim, and it had still taken 1,200 ships and 4 years and 900 dead to win. And the win had been so frightening that the Concorde had hidden the cost and called it a victory and dusted the proof. 19 years was a long time. The humans had not been idle. Out there on the rim, in worlds the Concorde had bled itself white to barely reach. A species that could not be made to believe in its own defeat had been building, and the Stillwater Veil was not the first of a new generation, but the last of the old one. A single ship from the war, and it had just walked out of the heart of the Concorde untouched. If this was what the Concorde had captured, the Keeper thought, what was it that the Concorde had failed to capture? What was waiting out there now, after 19 years, in the dark beyond the rim? The Keeper imagined it. He could not stop himself. 100 gray hulls, patient and unbendable, hanging over the homeworld, and a Concorde that had forgotten how to fight because it had spent 100 years winning without firing, and he understood that the human ship was not threatening him with that day. It was showing it to him the way the Adepts showed defeat, in full color, until it could not be argued with. The difference was that the human ship was giving him a way to keep that day from coming. Stop reaching into minds. Stop teaching the galaxy it cannot be fought. And the 100 ships would never need to come. The Keeper thought of the 40 stars. He thought of his own people, the Velith, who had ruled those 40 stars for 100 years, without ever once feeling the thing they poured into others. The Concord had never been shown its own defeat. It had only shown defeat. It had grown so used to being the certainty in every room that it had forgotten certainty could be a thing done to you, and now, in a single morning, a ship it had called dead had reached into the heart of the Empire and shown it, gently, exactly what 40 broken worlds had felt. The Keeper understood that this was the cruelest and kindest thing the human ship could possibly have done, and that it had chosen it on purpose, and that the choosing was the whole point. The Concord would never understand mercy until it had first understood fear, and the human ship had given it both, in that order, in a single hour. "I will carry it," Tovan said. "By the deep, I will carry every word." "We know you will," said the Stillwater Veil. "That is why we let you keep us. Now stand back from the console, Keeper. We are going to do one more thing, so that the Concord remembers, and then we are going to go home." The one more thing was a release. The Keeper had wondered, in the long hour of the gun and the surrender, and the slow patient leaving, what would become of Sorel Vaughn. The human ship had held her the whole time, frozen on the gallery floor, the most powerful adept in 40 stars, caught like a fly in the still water she had reached into. He had half expected the ship to keep her, to carry her off as a hostage, or to leave her empty the way her own gift had left 100 captains empty. He should have known better by then. The human ship did not take what it did not need, and it did not break what it could teach. Out on the gallery floor, where she had stood frozen for the better part of an hour, with her white eyes full of a defeat she had never shown another living soul, Overseer Sorel Vaughn took a breath. The Keeper saw it on the sensor the human ship still allowed him. He saw the most powerful adept in 40 stars come back into herself all at once, like a sleeper waking from a fall, and stagger, and catch herself on the empty cradle that had held the human ship for 19 years. Her 3 young adepts crouched around her, shaking, unharmed, and Sorel Vaughn lifted her head and looked through the broken gallery doors at the gray hull hanging in the dark, and she did not reach for it again. She would never reach for anything again. The Keeper understood that, watching her, not because the human ship had broken her gift, but because she had finally felt the thing the records could only describe. She had poured her certainty into a will that would not take it, and she had felt that will turn and look back at her, vast and quiet and entirely unbent, and a mind that has felt that once cannot ever again believe its own certainties are the deepest thing in the room. The Concord had ruled 40 stars on the strength of believing that. Sorel Vaughn could no longer believe it, and she was the best they had. The human ship spoke to her, once, on the open channel, in the rolling thunder of its own tongue, and then in hers, so that the whole station would understand. "You reached into us," it said, expecting cold iron. "Carry what you found instead. You are free, Overseer. Tell them what is at the bottom of the still water." Sorel Vaughn bowed her head to the gray hull. The most powerful adept in the history of the Velith Concord, who had broken 40 worlds without firing a shot, bowed to a ship her empire had labeled a corpse and dusted for 19 years. Then she gathered her shaking adepts and she walked off the gallery floor, and she did not look back, and the Keeper never saw her pour a certainty into anyone again as long as she lived. That was the mercy. That was the lesson written into the one mind in 40 stars best able to carry it. Then the Stillwater Veil kept its word about the remembering. It did not fire on the homeworld. It did not fire on the fleets that were, even now, scrambling up out of the gravity well far below, hundreds of Concord warships rising in a panic that came 19 years too late. It turned, instead, back toward Vaultward Station, toward the great ring with its 2 clean round holes already cut through it, and it spoke a single word to the Keeper. "Watch," it said, and it fired. Not at the station. Past it. The human ship raised its guns and fired a long deliberate volley out into empty space, a dozen lances of white light crossing the dark in a slow fan, and where each one passed it left a line. The Keeper did not understand at first. Then the lines began to glow, holding in the vacuum the way the bolts had hung frozen against the hull, Light that should have faded and did not. Light that the human ship was holding in place by some art the Concorde had no name for, and the lines crossed and joined, and the keeper saw that they were letters. The Stillwater Veil was writing across the sky above the homeworld. It wrote in the human tongue, in letters 100 kilometers tall, blazing white against the dark, where every soul on the homeworld, and every soul in the rising fleets, could look up and see them. The keeper could not read the letters, but the human ship, gently, told him what they said, and he wrote them into his chronicle that night, and into every chronicle for the rest of his long life, and the words were these: "We were never dead. We were only patient. There is a will you cannot bend. Stop reaching, and we will never come." The letters burned in the sky for a full hour, long enough for the homeworld to see them rise, and watch them hold, and understand that they would not fade. Long enough for the rising fleets to stop rising, to hang in the dark beneath that blazing sentence, not daring to close the distance, because every captain in every ship had heard by now what one gray hull had done to 9 ceremonial turrets and a frozen overseer, and not one of them wanted to be the first to learn what it would do to a fleet. The keeper learned later how many ships had risen: 412. It was the largest concentration of Concorde force assembled in a single place in 60 years. 412 warships called up out of the gravity well in a panic, more firepower than the Concorde had brought to most of its conquests. And the 412 hung in the dark and did nothing, because doing something meant being the first ship to move toward the gray hull, and no captain among the 412 was willing to be that ship. The keeper thought about that for years afterward. The Concorde had 412 warships and one enemy, and it could not make itself attack, and the reason was not cowardice, it was arithmetic. Every captain had done the same sum. One human ship had frozen 9 shots in the air and deleted 40 meters of stone twice without effort, and caught the best adept in 40 stars in its hand. The honest question was not whether 412 ships could destroy it. The honest question was how many of the 412 would still exist afterward, and no one wanted to learn the answer with their own ship. Then, its lesson written, its crew waking warm in its deep heart, its word kept, and its mercy given, the Stillwater Veil turned toward the rim, and the cold worlds far away, where the humans had first been found, and it lit its drives. The keeper watched it go. It did not flee. That was the thing he would tell listeners for the rest of his life, the thing they never quite believed. The human ship did not run from the Concorde fleets. It simply left, at a pace of its own choosing, unhurried, 1,100 meters of waking iron with its name glowing red, and the 400 Concorde warships that hung in the dark above the homeworld let it go, because there was not one captain among them willing to chase a thing that had frozen 9 shots in the air and cut clean holes through 40 meters of stone without raising its voice. It crossed the system slowly enough that the keeper could watch it the whole way on the few sensors it left him as a courtesy. He understood the courtesy. The human ship wanted to be watched. It wanted the Concorde to see, all the way to the dark edge of the system, the gray hull it had thought a relic, leaving on its own terms, untouched, unbroken, carrying 340 waking hearts home through the heart of the empire that had believed there was nothing it could not end. At the edge of the dark, the Stillwater Veil spoke to Tovan Rice one last time. "Keeper," it said, "you named our scars. You did not believe we were dead. When the others write this day, they will write it wrong. They will say we attacked. They will say we threatened. Write it true. We were kept, and we were patient, and when the door was opened from the inside, we did not burn the home of the people who opened it. Write that a will that will not break is not the same as a will that wants to kill. Write that we left a chronicler alive to tell it, because we trusted him to tell it true. Will you write it true?" "I will," said Tovan Riza, keeper of an empty cradle. "By the deep I will write nothing else." Then the human ship lit its drives to full, and the gray hull and the glowing name and the 340 waking hearts dwindled to a single point of light, and the point of light slid over the edge of the dark and was gone, home to the rim, home to the cold worlds, home to whatever the humans were building out there. In the 19 years the Concorde had spent dusting a corpse that was not a corpse. And the words it had written burned in the sky above the homeworld for a full hour more, and then, all at once, faded, as if the ship had been holding them in place from a great distance and had finally, gently, let them go. There was one more thing the keeper saw, in the last minutes before the gray hull slid over the edge of the dark, and it was the thing he held closest of all in the years that came after. The human ship opened, for a moment, the eyes it had kept closed to the Concorde for 19 years, and it let the keeper see in. Just one image, sent gently to the sensor it had left him as a courtesy. The deep heart of the ship, the cold cells the scanners had never found, and in the cells, sitting up, slow and cold, and wrapped in the frost of a 19-year sleep, the humans, 340 of them, waking. The keeper could not read human faces. But he did not need to. He watched the nearest of them lift its head and look around at the cold cell it had slept in for 19 years and understand, slowly, that the patience had worked, that the long bet had come home, that the ship had held still long enough, and the door had opened and they were free. And the human did a thing the keeper had no word for in his own tongue, a thing humans do, a baring of the teeth that is not a threat, and the keeper understood that it was the human way of being glad. 340 of them, waking in the dark, baring their teeth at being alive. Then the ship gently closed the image, and the keeper was left with the empty cradle and the burning sky and the slow, bright point of the hull, sliding away toward home. The Velith Concorde did not speak of that day for a long time. It could not be hidden. 2 clean round holes through Vaultward Station could not be hidden. A blazing human sentence 100 kilometers tall, seen by an entire homeworld, could not be hidden. So the Concorde did the thing empires do. It argued about what the day had meant. There were those who said it was an attack repelled, a raider driven off, a single ship that had escaped only because Vaultward was a vault and not a fortress. There were those who said the station's defenses had merely been caught unready. There were those, loud and certain, who said the Concorde should build 1,000 warships and chase the gray hull to the rim and finish what was begun 19 years ago. And then those loud, certain voices would remember the sky, the 100 kilometers of burning letters. Stop reaching, and we will never come. And they would grow quiet, because every one of them had looked up that day and felt, for the first time in their lives, the cold and simple thing that 40 broken worlds had felt when the adepts reached into them. They had felt that they had already lost, and it had not come from an adept. It had come from a ship the Concorde had called a corpse, and there was no arguing with it, because the ship had proven every word. The keeper went to see her once, in the years after, when she was very old and lived alone in a tower on the homeworld, with the curtains drawn. He brought his chronicle. He thought she might want to correct it, or argue with it, or tell him he had gotten the day wrong. She read it through, slowly, with her old white eyes, and when she finished, she set it down and was quiet for a long time, and then she told the keeper the one thing she had never put in any of her own writings. She told him what it had felt like, to be held. She said that when she reached into the human ship, she had expected the small, bright fear of a machine, and instead she had found a depth. Not a wall, she said. Rise, you must understand, it was not a wall I could have pushed against. It was a depth. I reached down into it, expecting to touch the bottom, the way I have touched the bottom of 9,000 mines, and there was no bottom. I kept reaching. There was no bottom. And then, very gently, far down in the dark where I should have found the floor of it, the depth closed its hand around mine, and it was not cruel, and it was not angry, and it simply would not let go, and it held me there at the edge of a thing that had no bottom, and it let me understand, slowly, that this was what I had been doing to others all my life, pouring my certainty into people who had no floor I could not have found, if I had only ever bothered to reach gently instead of reaching to win. She said, I spent 300 years certain there was no mind I could not read. The human ship did not break that certainty. It simply showed me the bottom of my own, and there was a bottom, Risa. That was the thing. My certainty had a floor, and theirs did not. I have not poured a certainty into anyone since, because I cannot, knowing that. Then she gave the keeper back his chronicle, and told him he had gotten the day exactly right, and asked him to leave the curtains drawn, and he never saw her again. Sorrel Vaughn never poured a certainty again. She had been the best they had, and she resigned her gift, and she spent the rest of her years writing a single long argument that the Concord did not want to read and could not quite throw away. It said that the Empire had won 40 wars by convincing 40 species of a defeat that was, against the Concord, true. And it said that the humans were the one species the Concord could never defeat that way, because a human will, shown its own death, simply does not believe it, and a war you can only win by firing is a war the Concord had forgotten how to fight. She wrote that the day at Vaultward had not been a battle. It had been a mercy. The humans had shown the Concord exactly what they could do, and had chosen, deliberately, not to do it, and had left a sentence in the sky telling the Concord how to keep them from ever needing to. She wrote that the wise thing, the only thing, was to read that sentence and obey it. The Concord did not obey it all at once. Empires never do. But the reaching slowed. The adepts went out less often, and the certainties they poured were smaller, more careful, and when a young loud species appeared on the rim, the Concord found, to its own surprise, that it no longer rushed to show that species its defeat. It hesitated, it remembered the sky, and in the hesitation, on a dozen worlds, the pouring of certainty into unwilling minds began, slowly, year by year, to stop. That was the lesson the Stillwater Vale had carved into Vaultward Station, and into the sky, and into the best mind the Concord owned. Not destruction, memory. The human ship had reached into the heart of an empire that believed nothing could make it afraid, and it had left that empire afraid. Gently, permanently, with 2 clean holes and a sentence, and a single ship sliding home over the edge of the dark. Tovan Reze wrote it true. He wrote it the way the human ship had asked, the whole of it, the patience and the long sleep, and the door opened from the inside, the held overseer and the given mercy, the sentence in the sky, and the gray hull leaving on its own terms, with 340 waking hearts. He wrote that the Concord had thought it a relic, had dusted it, and labeled it, and lectured its children under the closed fist of the prow, and that the relic had been listening the whole time, patient at the bottom of the still water, waiting 19 years for a careless hand to reach down. He wrote that the hand had reached down, and the still water had closed around it, gently, and let it go. There came a day, years on, when a young cataloger asked the keeper the question everyone eventually asked, the question the Concord could not stop asking itself in private. Why did it not destroy us? It could have. You say it yourself, old one. It could have burned the homeworld and ended 40 stars in an afternoon. Why did it not? And Tovan Reze, who had thought about almost nothing else for years, gave the young cataloger the answer he had worked his whole long life to understand. Because, he said, destroying us would have taught us nothing. A burned homeworld is a tragedy, and a tragedy can be told any way the teller likes. If the human ship had ended us, the Concord that came after would have remembered itself as a victim, struck down by a monster, and it would have rebuilt and reached into minds again and again, and one day it would have met the humans once more, and there would have been another war, and another, until one of us was gone for good. The human ship did not want another war. It wanted the last one, so it did the harder thing. It let us live, and it made sure we understood, completely, with no room left to lie to ourselves, that we lived because it chose to let us. That is a far heavier thing to carry than death, young one. The dead carry nothing. We have to carry knowing. The young cataloger thought about that for a long time, and then asked the second question, the one that always followed. And will they come? The 100 ships, will they ever come? Not, the keeper said, if we remember. That is the whole of it. That is the only thing the sentence in the sky ever meant. They are not coming for us. They are waiting to see whether we make them come. Every year that we do not reach into a mind that will not break is a year the 100 ships stay home. We hold the door now, child. We always did. We just did not know it, because we had spent 100 years certain that we were the only hand that could ever turn a lock. His chronicle was not the one the Concorde put in its halls. The Concorde's official record said an attack had been repelled, but the keepers who came after Tovan, the quiet ones who dusted the empty cradle in the Hall of Quiet Trophies, passed his true account hand to hand in the dark, and read it, and understood. And every one of them, standing before the cradle where the gray hull had hung, felt the same thing the keeper had felt, with his palm flat against the warm and humming iron in the last days before it woke. That somewhere out on the rim, in the cold worlds the Concorde had once thought to break, the humans were not few anymore, that they were building, that they were patient, that a will the Concorde could not bend was the deepest thing in any room, and always had been, and that the only reason 100 gray hulls had not yet come was that the Concorde, slowly, year by year, was learning to put down the certainty and stop reaching into minds that would not break. For a long while after, the keeper kept the watch he had always kept, except that now there was nothing to watch. He drifted his sled out into the dim gallery on the old slow rounds, past the 940 trophies and the 2 patched holes in the ring, and he came to the center where the gray fist had hung, and he stopped, and he put his palm flat against the empty air where the warm and humming iron used to be. There was nothing there. There would never be anything there again. And still, every cycle, he reached out and felt for it, the way a creature feels for a tooth that has been pulled, and every cycle the doubt he had carried for 15 years was finally, completely gone, because the thing he had never quite believed was dead had proven, beyond any argument the Concorde could ever make, that it had never been dead at all. Tovan Reza tended the empty cradle until he was old. He never filled it. He would not let anyone hang another trophy there, and because he was the keeper and because of what he had seen, no one argued. He left it empty, 1,100 meters of empty dark in the center of the Hall of Quiet Trophies, with the great scoured ghost of a name still legible on the cradle wall where the prow had rested for 19 years. Visitors would ask him what had hung there, and the old chronicler would spread his 4 arms wide, the way he had 10,000 times, and he would tell them the truth, the whole truth, the only thing worth keeping. A human warship hung here, he would say. We thought it was a relic. We dusted it, and labeled it, and told our children there was nothing it could not be. And then one day it roared to life, and it taught us, gently, with 2 clean holes and a sentence in the sky, that we had been keeping the one thing in 40 stars we should have feared. It did not burn us. It could have. It chose to be remembered instead. So remember it. Then he would lower his arms and look at the empty dark in the center of the hall, and the visitors would look with him, and for a moment the whole gallery would be silent, the silence of a place that had learned, far too late, exactly what it had been keeping. And out past the station, past the homeworld, past the rising and forever cautious fleets, far away on the cold edge of the rim, the humans went on building in the dark, patient as still water, waiting for no door at all, because the door had already been opened, and the lesson had already been carried, and the Concorde, for the first time in 100 years, had finally learned to be afraid of the right thing.